Boa noite a todos. Para quem não me conhece, eu sou Adriana Zebulun, conselheira e coordenadora do IB no Rio de Janeiro. Hoje quem vai abrir o evento, na verdade, é o querido Ricardo Gorodovitz, que é um dos integrantes do núcleo executivo do IB Rio, grande parceiro e o maior articulador das atividades da Fania e do Eli no Rio. Obrigada, Rick. Mas eu não podia deixar de falar com vocês que acompanham o Instituto Brasil-Israel nesse dia tão especial. Um dia em que a palavra esperança, em que a palavra paz volta a encontrar espaço no coração de muitos de nós. Depois de 2 anos tão duros, marcados por dor, medo e incertezas, celebramos hoje o cessar-fogo entre Israel e Gaza e o retorno dos reféns israelenses. É impossível não se emocionar. Quero agradecer aos diretores voluntários do IB, à equipe executiva do IB, que foram incansáveis nos últimos anos, e agradecer profundamente a presença de vocês, que foram tão parceiros nesses anos, por estarmos juntos nesses 2 anos, compartilhando não apenas momentos de reflexão e cultura, mas também a luta pela democracia, pelo diálogo e pela paz. Muito obrigada pela parceria. Ricardo segue.
Muito bem. Bom, boa noite. Hag Sameach. Também agradecer a presença de todos. Queria agradecer em nome do IB, antes de mais nada, a Adriana, pela atividade incansável de trazer o que o IB tem de melhor para o Rio de Janeiro. Também aos nossos apoiadores, a FIERJ e a Janela Livraria. Muito bom contar com esses apoios. A Fania Oz-Salzberger, que a gente vai ouvir daqui a pouco, ela é uma escritora e historiadora israelense. Ela é professora emérita na Universidade de Haifa. Sendo escritora, ela tem vários livros, mas o livro mais conhecido dela é Os Judeus e as Palavras, que ela escreveu junto com o pai, Amós Oz, que apresenta tópicos, né, da história e da escrita judaica, da literatura judaica, de uma forma bastante original, bem diferente da habitual. Eu queria também chamar a atenção para outros eventos que a gente vai ter, tanto com o Leila Sterenberg quanto com a Fania. Amanhã, o Eli vai estar na Escola de Magistratura do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, amanhã às 10 horas da manhã. Ele vai estar falando sobre a questão da luta pela democracia e de um judiciário independente, né? Tanto no Brasil quanto em Israel, a gente tem enfrentado essa questão, tanto no que tange à independência dos poderes, mas também da eventual intervenção de um poder sobre o outro e de que forma que esses poderes podem, de alguma forma, se relacionar de uma forma equilibrada. E o Eli tem expertise nesse tema e, claro, vai trazer uma visão sobre o judiciário israelense e o que tem acontecido nos últimos anos, e vai ter a oportunidade também de responder perguntas e de esclarecer. A gente vai lá ter pessoas da magistratura do Rio de Janeiro que vão fazer também uma ponderação sobre a mesma questão, sobre a ótica brasileira. Amanhã também, um pouco mais tarde, às 14 horas, na PUC, vai haver um evento com a Fania, onde ela deve falar principalmente sobre o legado do pai, do Amós Oz, a ser moderada pela professora Sônia Kramer. E, no caso do Emerge, é necessário fazer uma inscrição. Nas páginas do IB tem a orientação para fazer a inscrição. No caso da PUC, todos são muito bem-vindos para chegar e assistir, né? Espero que vocês já tenham aproveitado a oportunidade para comprar os livros que interessavam, e depois da nossa conversa aqui, a Fania vai autografar para aqueles que quiserem. No livro que escreveu com seu pai, Amós Oz, Fania observa que, mais do que o povo do livro, somos o povo da palavra. Nós, quando estudamos nossas fontes, fazemos uma brachá que nos orienta Le'esok bedivrei Torah, que pode, entre outras possíveis traduções, significar nos envolvermos com as palavras da Torá. E fazemos isso com prazer, interpretando, buscando correlações, como, por exemplo, perceber que a palavra shahar, alvorecer em hebraico, tem a mesma raiz, está contida dentro da palavra shichrur, que é libertação. Estamos hoje vivenciando a alegria da libertação dos nossos reféns e também preocupados com o alvorecer dos dias que virão. No despertar desse novo dia, de que forma lidaremos com o nosso passado para que essa sua memória no nosso presente nos permita construir um futuro melhor? Amós Oz foi uma espécie de consciência judaica, um grilo falante permanentemente nos ajudando a refletir. Quando ele se foi, muitos dentre nós se sentiram órfãos da sua voz, conjeturando, e agora? Como é que eu vou saber o que eu tenho que pensar? É nesse espaço, saber o que pensar, que o IB foi constituído. Não para nos definir e estreitar a reflexão, mas, ao contrário, nos alertando de que o campo das possibilidades é imenso e a verdade permeia o largo espectro de alternativas, se escondendo ora aqui, ora ali, e nos obrigando a nos manter atentos, com ouvidos abertos e num esforço contínuo para a ponderação. Acho que a frase que está aqui resume bem a ideia do IB. O IB resolveu trazer a Fania Oz-Salzberger porque acredita que em tempos desafiadores, como nesses últimos 2 anos, e o que nos espera ainda a partir de hoje, ouvir a voz da sociedade israelense é fundamental. Uma sociedade que tem múltiplas vozes e uma enorme complexidade. A Fania se tornou uma das vozes mais importantes que se somam à luta por um sionismo humanista, que percebe a importância da força sem perder a empatia pelo outro, que acredita na paz como condição necessária para a nossa autodeterminação como povo. Eu, hoje mais cedo, perguntei para ela como é que você quer ser apresentada. Ela falou, historiadora, escritora e ativista. Então, essa é a pessoa que a gente vai ter aqui hoje com a gente. É por isso que o IB convidou a Fania para estar no Brasil, participar do Festival Literário do Museu Judaico de São Paulo, que aconteceu nesse último final de semana, e por isso também que a traz ao Rio de Janeiro, para que possa oferecer algumas respostas e, mais ainda, agregar algumas perguntas aos nossos questionamentos. Simchat Torah ficará marcado pelo 7 de outubro de 2 anos atrás. Ou talvez pelo 13 de outubro de hoje, das alegrias que a gente vivenciou hoje. Como um ciclo que nunca termina, conviveremos com ambas as datas na lembrança desse dia. Né? Lembrando Simchat Torah, a gente termina a leitura da Torá e recomeça a leitura da Torá, um ciclo que nunca termina. Conviveremos com ambas as datas na lembrança desse dia. De tudo, o que podemos afirmar é que se a vida é cheia de altos e baixos, nossa tarefa é lidar com as tempestades, sempre mantendo a esperança e a confiança para alcançar a bonança. E por isso, agradecemos por estarmos aqui, vivenciando esse momento, por podermos tomar nossas decisões com autonomia e, com isso, trazer conosco para o nosso tempo a utopia da paz. Sheheyanu, Vekimanu, Veigianu, Lasmanazé. Agora eu queria convidar a Leila e a Fania para virem para cá. Elas são as donas da noite.
Lindas palavras, Ricardo. Adriana, como sempre, lindas também, viu? Não fica com ciúme. Gente, boa noite, Erev Tov. Que dia! Que dia! Acho que a Fania é pé quente. Quando ela chegou, eu estava tentando explicar para ela o que é pé quente, né? Alguém que brings luck, enfim. Porque acho que esse evento presencial não podia acontecer num momento mais auspicioso, alvissareiro, e sim, eu adoro palavras antigas, para uma situação nova, para uma esperança renovada, num futuro de paz, né? E, claro, para a sensação generalizada de alívio. É um prazer e um privilégio estar de volta a este teatro, projeto da minha mãe que está sentada ali, fazendo merchan aqui, e ter vocês nessa plateia, de verdade. E é uma honra ter a oportunidade de conversar com a Fania Oz-Salzberger, que já foi apresentada devidamente a vocês. Fania, muito bem-vinda. Welcome. It's really great to have you here this evening.
Obrigada. Shalom.
Erev Tov. Bom, lembrando que a gente tem a tradução simultânea, né? Então, para quem precisar. E lembrando também que a gente vai ter, como nos nossos eventos, a gente costuma ter nesse Leila Entrevista presencial, o pessoal do IB, a Carol e a Mel circulando com fichinhas para vocês colocarem suas perguntas. Então, elas estão ali atrás. Quem tiver pergunta, levanta a mão, faz assim, que elas vão até vocês. Vocês escrevem a pergunta e entregam um papelzinho para ela, e o papelzinho chegará até mim oportunamente. Pode fazer a pergunta em inglês ou em português, que eu me viro para traduzir aqui. That said, let's get back to English and let's get to it. My Hebrew is not good enough. Eventually, it's going to be. So I'll take the liberty of quoting my colleague from the Israeli press who interviewed you last month. A great interview, by the way, published on October 1st. And she began the conversation by asking a very, very simple question, to which I bet your answer today will be completely different considering recent developments. How are you?
Shalom. Good evening, Erev Tov. I'm happy to be here. It's not yet the answer, but we are getting there. I want to thank Ricardo and the wonderful colleagues of the Instituto Brasil-Israel and you, Leila, for welcoming me here so well. I love being in Rio. And for the first time in 2 years, I can say not what I usually answer, which is yet tov, one day it will be okay. But now I can say better, thank you. Because what we experienced this last night in Israel yesterday was today actually, was a tremendously important step towards healing for people personally and for the society as a whole.
In that interview, when asked about being optimistic, you explained the difference you see between optimism and hope. Optimism, you said, is the nice color or the lens through which one looks ahead. Hope, on the other hand, is a statement, a moral commitment, a tool. Are you hopeful right now?
Yes, hope is a tool. It's part of our toolbox for living and living well and living according to our best values. And many of us in Israel had a sense that our best values, our Israel, is slipping away, becoming something completely different, belonging to a different solar system of ideas. Whereas we remained behind with the values of our childhood, of our education and breeding, of our parents and grandparents. So I am a Zionist. This has to be said, it's important. In some places in the world, if I say it, people will close the door, but I still say it. Of the old style, of the core Zionism. And core Zionism had several values, but two of its most important values. After you define it, Zionist means that the Jewish nation has the right to have its own state within its ancestral land. Not on all of its ancestral land, within its ancestral land, Zion. But after you say that, there was a set of values. For example, simplicity and hard work were values of my kibbutz Zionism. But the two that I'm talking about now are pragmatism and solidarity. And there was a feeling in the last years, especially after the 7th of October, 23, that pragmatism and solidarity were kicked out of the window. So now we are beginning to be able to struggle for them, to restore these values, and bringing the hostages back home is a victory of Israeli solidarity, of the old-fashioned Zionist solidarity. So yes, it makes me very happy today.
Just recently you wrote an article for the Financial Times called "The Battle for the Soul of Israel." And throughout the text, you ask, which Israel? How central is this question today, not only for Israeli citizens, but also for Jews in the diaspora?
Yes, well, I would like to make it very clear. And I know that we are treading on sensitive soil here. Because some people say, right or wrong, I stand with Israel, and Israel is the elected government of Israel. When it was Ben-Gurion, it was Ben-Gurion. When it was Rabin, it was Rabin. And now it's Netanyahu, I stand by Netanyahu. This is the old Chutz La'aretz Mapai, we used to call it, the old notion of standing by Israel via its government. And its government was very important during the founding times. The father of the nation, Ben-Gurion, the Declaration of Independence, the labor Zionism who were predominant, and people stood by them. But to copy-paste this attitude to Israel today is problematic, because Israel today is not the Israel of the 1950s and 60s. It's not the Israel of Ben-Gurion. It has in some ways flourished wonderfully, and in other ways I think it is regressing. And it flourished wonderfully within what we call civil society. I would like to say, and we can expand later if you like, that Israel today is not the Israeli government, although of course the government rules and decides on the policies. But the real Israel today is Israeli civil society, which holds the values I mentioned: moderate Zionism, pragmatism, social solidarity, volunteering, clean hands, honesty, decency, and the wish to be part of the family of nations or part of the global community. This is no longer the current Israeli government. It is Israeli civil society. And so people will need to redefine what is Israel for them. There are a whole spectrum of Israels. If you are in Bnei Brak, it's one Israel. You are in Nahariya, it's another Israel. You are in Kibbutz Bor Chayil, yet another Israel. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, wonderful. I'm happy that there are many Israels, but the two that I'm interested in are the official Israel of the Netanyahu government and the civil society Israel of the kibbutzim and the volunteers and the pro-democracy movement and the hostage movement and the support for the bereaved families movement. This is my Israel. And I have to tell our friends abroad, dear friends, there's no other way now. You have to choose. You have to choose which is your Israel and to support it.
In that very same interview I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, you said we will have to do, what we have to do is very fundamental, very brave, very bold, not just an agreement with Palestinians, but also a new agreement with ourselves. And my question is the Messianic nationalist far right in Israel abusing and distorting the original concept of Zionism, which began, like you said, with an universal idea, and which is, or should be, the Jews' claim to a national home in their ancestral homeland with no claim to exclusive ownership? And is this racist and expansionist distortion by Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and others, and, by the way, supported by many evangelical Christians worldwide, one of the reasons so many young demonstrators across the globe see Zionism as something evil, lethal, toxic?
Yes. Well, I will once again say it clearly and straightforwardly. The extreme nationalist right in Israel, that is now almost 100% nationalist religious right, has not always been like that, by the way. I mean, the old, if anybody remembers the Mafdal, the Hamizrahi, the old religious Zionism used to be very moderate and to share a lot of values with labor Zionism and with mainstream Zionism. No longer. I think there was a process that began after the great victory of the 6-day war. And I was a child, and my father came in his uniform from the war and hugged us, and we felt wonderful. And only in retrospect, we began to understand that this victory was a Pyrrhus victory, that it landed us into a lot of trouble. One of the processes that started then, and it started small and grew tremendously, was the messianic idea of a few modern rabbis, themselves pupils of Rabbi Kook the Younger, who began to understand the birth of modern Israel as a direct work of God, began to see themselves as the direct interpreters of what God wants, and began to see our age as a messianic age. And this is why, and I'm doing fast forward here, this is why, on the 7th of October 23, Simchat Torah, throughout the day, most of our government ministers were not even in touch with the people. Netanyahu disappeared completely. I think you know that he disappeared. He only said something in the late evening. We don't know exactly what happened to him during those hours of the first day. Many of his religious ministers were in Beit Knesset. And even when they heard the news, not all of them made contact with the media, with the people. It was kind of a day without government. That's how it felt. But once the Chag was out, Motzai Simchat Torah, the very extremist minister, female politician Orit Struk, who is a partner of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and belongs to the Messianic sect, when approached by a journalist, Madam Minister, what do you have to say about this terrible attack that's still going on? Her answer became famous, or rather infamous. Orit Struk said to the microphone, בעברית, קודם כל חג שמח. Should I translate? First of all, happy Simchat Torah. Now, what's going on? And some of us who had been looking at this section of Israeli society understood immediately, and the rest of us understood a little later, that these people saw the 7th of October massacre, or the Simchat Torah massacre, as a sign for the coming of the Messiah. In Hebrew we say, לא פחות ולא יותר. No less and no more. And this is why they were so persuaded until 2 weeks ago that Israel can totally, ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip, remove the last Palestinian from there, and build settlements. And you have Orit Struk's good friend, Mrs. Daniela Weiss, who has a lot of money, sitting on the border with a group of Gar'in of 40 families with all the equipment already bought, waiting for the government to confirm that she can cross the border and start settling Gaza with Jews again, because the Messiah is coming. And these are some of the people who are running Israel today. By the way, Netanyahu is not there. Netanyahu is a total rationalist. A very self-centric rationalist, a total rationalist. But some of his fellow government coalition members are fully messianic, and it is not only extremely dangerous for Israel and for the world, what they have in mind, their vision of greater Israel, divinely ordained. It is also deeply anti-Zionist. And that's the point we have to make.
Sure. 30 years ago, your father wrote, Likud was Hamas' best friend. Also 30 years ago, and you were there, Yitzhak Rabin was murdered by a fanatic, messianic, an assassination that had many consequences for the peace process and for Israeli domestic politics. As a historian, would you say that the seeds of 2023, and I mean October 7th, but also the judicial coup, were planted back in 1995?
Yes, absolutely. You know, those of us who were taught a little bit of Marxism when we were children, Marxist history likes to say that a single person doesn't matter in history. It's all about groups and societies and social economical classes and multitudes. But I have to say, and I'm not a Marxist historian, I'm a liberal historian, that sometimes a single person is very, very, very important. Because a single person can change history. By the way, in the Tanakh, you have people changing the whole of the ancient Hebrew history. Both men and women, by the way. Moses, but also Tamar, look her up. They change history, single-handedly. In Israeli history, Rabin was such a person. He was leading us towards an agreement with the Palestinians, the Oslo Agreement, which can be debated whether it was a very good agreement, whether it could be better, but you felt that there was a responsible adult sitting there, and Rabin, I knew him, he was not a romantic. He was not looking romantically at the Palestinians and say, let's fall in love or something. He was very realistic, very tough, and there was a sense that the Oslo Agreement can go on, can develop, because he is standing at the steering wheel and he will allow no nonsense. And Arafat knew, and after that Abu Mazen, the current leader of the PLO, of the Palestinian Authority, knew that if they began acting nonsensically or violently, Rabin will be there. And he is tough. And he is a leader. Rabin was about to change history, but then another man came forward and changed history completely, and that was his murderer, Yigal Amir. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times called him the man who voted twice. Voted in the elections against Rabin and then killed Rabin and changed Israeli history very deeply. So yes, after Rabin, unfortunately, the Israeli left and the Israeli center did not manage to raise a new charismatic, responsible leader. Whereas Netanyahu grew up as a very charismatic leader. And in the beginning, he also looked responsible. But we couldn't offer any counterpart for the charisma, what we call today populism, of Benjamin Netanyahu. And that was a huge setback for the Israeli left center, for moderate Zionism. So the answer is absolutely 1995. Of course, the problems go earlier, to the Six-Day War, maybe even before. But that was a turning point. And that was, yes, of course, I can say I lost my Israel, but it's not that simple, you know. It's not only my Israel. We are not all kibbutzniks from the labor Zionism. But we lost the chance of having a good leader at the steering wheel of the country. And ever since then and until today, the steering wheel of the country is led by a progressively more and more, to put it gently, irresponsible bunch of people led by Netanyahu.
Yeah, you are a fierce critic of Netanyahu, and you are not alone in this room, believe me. And we all know he tried to use the war in Gaza to postpone the next chapters of his own story, his own fate, meaning the situation in court, his political future. What's in store for him, in your opinion?
The short and simple answer is that we don't know. There may be some kind of a legal deal with him, this way or the other, which more or less means that his trial will be in some ways halted, or his punishment would be, if convicted, his punishment might be very symbolic in return for leaving politics, except that, at least in my political milieu, nobody trusts a word that he says or promises, and let alone a promise not to run for elections anymore. So today in the Knesset, I don't know how many of you follow, Trump publicly called upon our president, Yitzhak Herzog, to give Netanyahu Chanina, Eli, amnesty.
Pardon, yeah.
Pardon him, you know, just off the top of his head. And I know that Mr. Herzog is thinking about it. He said so in an interview recently. And we think, many of us think, that it would be a very bad idea. But on the other hand, maybe it's the only way. Some pragmatists are saying maybe it's the only way to say goodbye to Mr. Netanyahu and start rebuilding our political system. So we don't know about the future. I think that this trial, this very slow trial, should end according to the laws of Israel, and whatever sanctions or punitive measures against Netanyahu, if he is found guilty, should be taken. But we are in a very shaky place between the rule of law and the legal constitutional democracy, and, don't take it personally, a banana republic. And I wouldn't like to see Israel further navigated into the corrupt labyrinth of non-democratic statehood.
And many Israelis would like to have early elections. Do you think that's going to happen, or is it more likely that they will take place on October 27th next year, more than 1 year from now? And how concerned are you about the risks, such as the present coalition trying to manipulate the results or the process, for instance, by limiting the voting rights of Arab citizens or the participation of Arab parties?
Yes, so to be, on the very current affairs level, there is already some initiatives of legislation from Likud and right of Likud Knesset members, and they usually don't initiate anything independently. They are told what to do. The Knesset is not really an independent, power of government anymore. Its majority is very much subservient to the executive, to the government. So there are already initiatives to legislate laws that will prohibit certain parties and certain people from running to the Knesset. Certain parties meaning Arab parties, and certain people meaning certain Arab politicians. It's not like back in the 1980s when there was an attempt to block the party of Meir Kahane, the late Rabbi Meir Kahana for racism. Today, the right can do whatever it wants, and nobody will block its way to the Knesset. That's Ben Gvir, who is a Kahanist, an openly racist party, and it's fine. But there is talk about banning Arab parties and Arab politicians. But there are many other tactics, apart from the legislation, which the Supreme Court will have to review. And the tactics are very much on the ground. For example, we set up a group, part of the protest groups. Eli, sitting here, is also involved, that is already getting ready for the coming elections, which should happen maximum in November 2026. We are already beginning to work now on what we call the purity of the elections, to make them clean and on top and legal and visible. So there is a very interesting study taking the polling station in the ultra-Orthodox areas, neighborhoods, Haredim, and in the ultra-nationalists, the settlements and polling stations of such a population. Whenever the Kalfi, Vadat HaKalfi, the committee of the polling station, had a representative from the center-left parties, the counting was done very correctly and openly. When there was no member in the polling box committee from the center-left parties, right of Likud and right of Likud. So this begs the question, what's going on in those counting, the immediate counting of, because, our system, unlike yours, is not fully digitized. I wish it were. So
ours is very modern, I'd say.
Well, we should look up to you and learn from you. So very basically, you can do all sorts of what in Yiddish used to be called foile shtick in polling stations, in the counting of votes. You can also make sure that certain people would not come to vote at all. You kind of scare them away or whatever. All sorts of very un-Israeli tactics that already seem to be on the ground. So we are trying to preempt it. We are trying to create an on-the-ground, very, very widespread network of gatekeepers, of watchers, of polling box supervisors to make sure this doesn't happen. But the danger is there. Also, one more sentence, the danger that like our friend Mr. Zelensky in Ukraine, who has other reasons, but that our government would declare, we are postponing the elections because this is a time of emergency. That's one reason perhaps why they wanted the war to go on. So we need to be on our guard to make sure that the coming elections are in time and honestly and decently carried out.
Lembrando, pessoal, vocês podem fazer pergunta, tá? Então não fiquem tímidos, papeizinhos como esse aqui circulando nas mãos aí de Carol e Mel, então levantem o braço, por favor. Participem. So you mentioned Donald Trump addressing the Knesset and praising Netanyahu, by the way. What do you make of his role in the deal with Hamas and more broadly of his stance so far towards Israel and the Middle East?
When I look at Donald Trump, the way he is in the White House, the way he was yesterday or this morning actually in the Knesset, sometimes I feel that all of us are one big toy for him. Israel is a toy, Palestine is a toy, the Middle East is a sandbox to play in. And when he gets sick and tired of us, he will throw us away and go to some other place. He dearly wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He dearly wants it. And, maybe deep inside he's a very pro-peacenik sort of person, but I take him more like a typhoon, a hurricane, a force of nature. A hurricane doesn't have morality. A hurricane is not left-wing or right-wing. A hurricane is a hurricane. So this force of nature has now brought a very good result, very impressive. I have to grant that to him. We all have to. In returning all the living hostages to Israel, to tell you the truth, I didn't believe it will happen. I didn't believe that Einav Tsangauker will hug her living son, Matan. And then we all saw the pictures, and if you haven't seen them, you should see them. Unbelievable. Or Sylvia Conyo from near Oz, who in the evening of the 7th of October found herself alone with 9 family members taken hostage or missing. Her sons, wives and girlfriends, some of her girlfriends, unbelievable. And now yesterday she got back her remaining 2 sons, alive. This is Donald Trump, this is the hurricane. This is this force of nature or history, but that doesn't mean he will be on my side tomorrow. And it certainly doesn't mean that he will help us to defend Israeli democracy, because look what he's doing in his own country. So his toy box is now made of ideas of peace, but democracy is not part of his toy box. So we should be worried about the future both of the United States and of the Israeli democracy.
Well, from his point of view, peace is good for business, but is democracy good for business? Yeah, good question, right? And your father used to say that the dispute between Israel and Palestine is a real estate dispute. And in your article for the Financial Times, you begin by stating, neither Israelis nor Palestinians are going to disappear anytime soon. No one can destroy their respective claims to a sovereign state in their ancestral homeland, which happens to be the same land. Bearing a cataclysmic event, there will be no river to see Palestine and no greater Israel. This is a conflict that can only be solved by territorial and political compromise. After the tragedies of the past 2 years, are we closer to the possibility of a long-lasting compromise or much, much more distant?
Well, in our book, Jews and Words, we say that part of the best of Jewish tradition is that you teach the children to challenge the grown-ups with difficult questions. We say that the kushiyot of the Haggadah, what are the kushiyot? The kushiyot are intellectual toys, teaching the kids how to play with ideas and to not to obey the father and the rabbi and God, but to keep making life difficult for the father and the rabbi and God by asking difficult questions, by arguing, by disagreeing. So I definitely disagreed with my father on a few things. We disagreed on the internet. I was very excited by the internet, 25 years ago. And my father said to me, Fania, if it doesn't look like a book, if it doesn't smell like a book, it's not a book. He didn't like Kindle. We had some very funny arguments. But to go back to the serious point, I disagree about defining the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a real estate dispute. Maybe it was in the beginning. Maybe he was right after 1967, but not anymore, because so much religious fanaticism has gone into it. And when religious fanaticism of any kind, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, enters the arena, then it's no longer a real estate dispute. It's no longer a kind of a rational disagreement that you have to decide according to justice or social justice. It's a clash of fanatics and fanatics. So the only way out of a clash of fanatics against fanatics, of Hamas against Ben-Gvir, and I'm not saying they are equal. Ben-Gvir is a very obnoxious man, but he's not a mass murderer. But in terms of the expectation for some kind of a divine command to justify the worst actions, they are similar. And one thing that will have to be done you know, the new, fairly new expression, to de-radicalize. And we will have to de-radicalize both society. Again, it's not symmetric. There is more de-radicalizing to do on the Palestinian side, especially in Gaza, than on the Israeli side. But we too have to tell our fanatics that they cannot navigate the ship anymore. That the Messiah is not coming so quickly. I'm sorry to say this, people, but the Messiah is not coming so quickly.
And de-radicalizing is quite a challenge at this point. Of course, hope as a tool helps, but you know, what else can we do? And that said, I'm going to ask a question by Luna, who is here. Yeah. How can we convince people that Israel is more than Netanyahu and the extreme right? How can we try to rebuild public opinion about Jews, Zionism, and Israelis around the world?
Thank you for the question. And the answer is by helping my part of Israeli society. We who stand up very proudly and say we are not our government. We are not our government. Or what I've been telling the Germans, you know, because of my academic field, I have a lot of connections with German academics and media and politicians and the president. I have been telling them for 2 years, not only them, other countries too, but especially to them, you need to choose between standing by the Netanyahu government and standing by Israeli civil society. You cannot do both anymore. So, to put it in a very easy motto, empower the moderates on both sides, Palestinian moderates, and there are such, and the Israeli moderates who are big, organized movement. Now, our movement, you know, it is a spectrum. There is the democracy protest movement that thinks that the Knesset legislation against the Supreme Court is a very bad idea, and it is ruining the democratic equilibrium. So that's a pro-democracy protest. And then, of course, we have the peace camp that went very quiet after the 7th of October. Of course, we were shell-shocked, but now the peace camp is back again within the general civil society protest. And we have all the wonderful voluntary organizations, and you know about them, helping the survivors, helping the evacuees, helping the families, the pro-hostage movement. What is going to happen from now on is that the pro-hostage movement has achieved almost all of its goals. We still have, don't forget, a lot of over 20 bodies of murdered hostages that still have to be returned. So, but I can already tell you that a significant part, not all, but a significant part of the Free the Hostages movement is also part of the other protest, which is still very necessary. Pro-democracy and I would call it responsible horizon for peace. It's no longer peace now. No, peace cannot be now. But the same people, the same peaceniks are now looking for a horizon, for some, let's begin a conversation. And Trump is helping. Let's see if we can get a government of technocrats to run Gaza. Let's see if the Palestinian Authority, which itself needs a little de-radicalizing in its education system, can take over Gaza. Let's see how we can help Palestinian moderates rise up, and at the same time, and that's what we have to tell the world, help the Israeli moderates. And some of you are already doing this, and we are very grateful. And you know, Leila, maybe it's a good chance now to say what I want to say to my dear Jewish brothers and sisters around the world. You know, you're having a very difficult time. Very difficult time. I feel I have to apologize to you on behalf of the government that I did not vote for. And so many Israelis, good Israelis, are so deep in our own troubles, in our own trauma, that we underestimate what our beloved cousins are going through in the rest of the world. By the way, Brazil is in a better place than the British Jews and the Canadian Jewish community. And I have many friends in the German Jewish communities, the Australians, they're going through hell. And I feel as an Israeli that I have to reach out and to say I appreciate it and I'm sorry for it. And we need to help each other. So empowering the moderates is also an interaction between our communities and my part of Israeli society, but it also goes to the non-Jewish world. If you are not part of the extreme left haters of Israel, who want Israel to disappear tomorrow morning, and they're not people we can conduct dialogue with them right now. If you are part of the old left, center, social democratic, liberal traditions, then you can find friends and allies in Israeli civil society. And that's, I think, what we need to do on both sides.
Another question from Matthew Schertman. Is the stigma of genocide going to stay, or is it going to vanish sometime in the future?
You know, I spend an hour every day on something called Twitter. Actually, it's not called Twitter anymore, it's called X. And my family doesn't like it, and they're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. But that's my chance to see what's going on, out there. And there you have a lot of Israel haters, as I described before, those who want us to disappear, and they have their mantras, their talking points. I already recognize them. So one talking point is, first of all, to declare that Israel is conducting a genocide in Gaza, that it's already a clear, proven fact. I'm a historian. I teach in a law school at the University of Haifa, and our best friends are lawyers, also lawyers who specialize in international law and the law of war, and most of them don't know. We don't have enough data to make a decision. I dearly hope not. When we Israelis think about the genocide, we think about the Shoah. And then we say very naturally, very rightly, it's not a Shoah in Gaza. But it's bad enough. So for me, for now, since we still don't know, genocide is a key word for many people for saying Israel has no right to exist. And then they have different schools, like the school that says, now Israel has no right to exist after it conducted genocide in Gaza. And others say from the very beginning, Israel had no right to exist. These are the people who tell me, go back to Poland, go back to Germany, and go back to Russia. I'm not laughing. No, it's a serious thing, and there are a lot of people who are all on some degree of ignorance, historical ignorance, political ignorance. These are the crowds in the campuses that you see in the United States and elsewhere. People who know very little, but they follow the most extremist historians and thinkers, and they want to eradicate Israel. So my answer is immediately genocide or no genocide. Well, we will know. Soon enough, we will know whether according to firmly established in international law, this is genocide or not. And I'm very sad that we have reached this situation. But if you are taking the further step to eradicating the state of Israel, forget it. Forget it. Other countries have been accused of genocide, rightly or wrongly, and nobody told them to stop existing. People should understand that Israel is not going away. I would add, the only people who can destroy Israel are from inside Israel. Unfortunately, a little bit around its coalition government today. But Israel is not going away. 7 million Jews with an atom bomb are not going away. I'm sorry, I'm beginning to sound like Trump. But But, we also have to talk about power, about brute power. That Zionism was also about that, defending ourselves within our borders with weaponry. But having said all that, very sadly, I have no doubt in my mind, and I'm talking to a lot of soldiers, that war crimes were committed. Every war has war crimes, but maybe we exaggerated this time. Out of the anger and trauma and the fact that some of the soldiers and commanders on the ground were listening to Ben Gvir too much, there have been war crimes. We should live with them, and the rebuilding after the war, the way Gaza will have to be rebuilt physically and politically, we Israelis will need to rebuild ourselves morally and constitutionally, and to go back to some of the values that Zionism always held and that our government has lost in the recent years.
So many questions now, and very good ones. How do you see the Israeli society stance towards Gaza, destruction, hunger, suffering? Because there are critics in Brazil who say that opposition, the civil society, the opposition against Netanyahu, has talked about the hostages, but that they were sort of indifferent towards the Palestinians in Gaza. Do you agree? And how much of what happens in Gaza, what happened in Gaza, does the media, or do the media in Israel show? Because I'm sorry, I was translating.
Well, the question is kind of covering everything.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say, just
I was doing the version in English.
If you remove the question mark, then you've already answered. Look, in the first months after the 7th of October, there was such a collective shock and ongoing trauma. We are not post-traumatic, we are in-traumatic, that people said horrible things. And not only all sorts of Kahanist politicians said that Gaza should be erased, or flattened, all these words. Also, my friends, the kibbutzniks from the kibbutzim that were targeted, and we interviewed people, I was in a group that volunteered to, right after the 7th of October, to take people's stories right away when they're still fresh from the kibbutzim that were attacked. And it was very, very difficult and traumatic. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them said, I would like to see Gaza completely flattened. They don't deserve to exist anymore, and so on and so forth. So the first months of this kind of trauma, think about the Brits. The Brits bombed Dresden to dust years after the Battle of Britain, when Britain was already safe. They were not even in danger of their homeland, but they still bombed Dresden to dust. So collectives can behave and think very violently in times of great trauma. And that lasted for a while. I blame the politicians, because leaders must not talk like the ordinary person talks. Leaders should be responsible. Instead, our leaders were even more extreme and violent than the people. But when, unfortunately, I hope it never happens to you, but when you are in a serious car accident, and you crashed into a car going the opposite direction, your first thoughts and second and third thoughts are not, how are the people in the other car? You think about yourself and your loved ones who were sitting with you in the car. Gradually, and I will be quick, but it's very important, gradually more and more Israelis, certainly from our side of society, but also religious people, some rabbis, are waking up to the humanitarian agony of Palestinians, and to the fact that some Palestinians in Gaza are innocent. You can say civilians, but not all the civilians are innocent. Remember that on the 7th of October, and we now know over 1,000 civilians. There were even a few in Kibbutz Be'eri, they heard from the safe rooms, they heard a few women walking around, taking nice things back home with them. So a lot of civilians are not innocent and took part in the massacre, but still there are hundreds of thousands of Gazan innocents. And more Israelis are taking this into account and beginning to deal with it morally. So, we were emotionally unavailable for 2 years, but now it's time to become emotionally available. And when you go to the big demonstrations, you see that the circle of Omdim Beyachad, if you know the organization, standing together, Jewish, Arab, very excellent organization, also working very well. I hope some of you know and support them. So they always stand in the big demonstrations. And more you see their circle going more center. And people come and join them and listen to them. And nobody tells them, go away, you are not Zionists, you are for the Arabs. They are part of the spectrum of the center left, and I'm very, very happy about it. So we are waking up morally.
Good to know, really. So do you see a new political leadership emerging from the civil society movements, asks Eliane. And another question that relates to it. Do you think that if Israel had someone from the left in the government, Israel would be supported by the left in Latin America? And he asks so because Jews and Zionists and the right wing are all put in the same place.
Yes, it's very true. And first, the second question, and then I'll go back to the first about leaders, about new leaders. So for the second questions, there are very roughly, this is what I tell my students, two dynasties of left wing in the world, two different DNAs of left wing. One DNA is the old socialist and its Western counterpart or child, social democracy. And this is a very rationalistic Enlightenment movement. It's about rights, it's about equality, it's about rationality and science. And the other DNA is the so-called woke when it's extreme, because woke when it's moderate is very close to the socialist kind of left. But the more extreme post-colonialist left, which is so fashionable in the campuses today and among intellectuals today and among people with big egos today. And the post-colonialist left sees the world in black and white, the white being the global south, the colonized nations, the black being the north, the colonizers, the Western cultures, and all the Jews are pushed into this rubric, and therefore this kind of left thinks that Israel should not exist because it is 100% white colonial process. I can't even begin to tell you as a historian how stupid this is, forgive me. But this is for a different seminary, but this is totally ahistorical and yet a very prevalent. So this kind of left, we can't expect much from them, except for people who will see the light and understand that life is a bit more nuanced and complicated than they thought when they were 20 years old. But the rational left, what I called before, the children of the social democrat traditions, and I have, my Twitter following, I have about 40,000 people, and I would say 80% of them from Europe, from Latin America, even from East Asia, by the way, are people that have some social democrat background, and they loved the old Israel, and they want to find out if the old Israel that they knew still exists. People who are volunteers in kibbutzim in the 70s and 80s. And I tell them, yes, we still exist, and we are the civil society, we are the protest movement, you should support us. So that kind of left, I think we can get important allies if we manage to beat the current leadership of Israel and to replace it. And this takes me to the earlier question. Yes, there are a few very outstanding new leaders and young leaders on the rise from the protest movement, from the pro-democracy movement. First and foremost, Yair Golan, who was already elected head of the Democrat Party, and they will soon go through a primaries. You know, it's a very democratic organization, so as soon as the elections are really on the horizon, there will be primaries. Some very good Knesset members of the younger generation. They don't have many, but they have good ones, like Gilad Kariv, if you know him, like Naama Lazimi, and a few others. From the protest movement, you have Shikma Bresler, whom the Likud is very afraid of, so they already had a whole smearing campaign against her with lies and threats. There is Ran Harnevo.
Alon Lee Green as well. Alon Lee Green.
Alon Lee Green, the head of Omdim B'Yar of Standing Together. And there is Jonathan Shimris, whose brother died horribly. He was a hostage who managed to run away with two friends from their captors in Gaza, and then Israeli soldiers, I don't know if you remember it, shot them by mistake. Terrible tragedy, terrible. And Jonathan, the brother, is an up-and-coming leader. He's very charismatic. He's the one who is organizing with his team of volunteers the 7th of October memorial events that we have had in the last 2 years. So there are quite a few younger and young people with the potential to lead the center-left. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Realistically, how do you imagine the design, the drawing of the map of Palestine resulting from the present peace process?
Yes, well, the Trump plan, and by the way, also the speech of the head of the Palestinian Authority, of Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, in the United Nations, which was a very moderate speech, are flowing into the known two states paradigm. And this two states paradigm has existed since, my father was among the founders of the Peace Now movement in the 70s, and then the Oslo Accords, and then there was a Geneva plan. It's all more or less the same, give or take a few nuances, but the idea is to divide the land according to the green line. That is the line of Israeli borders, internationally recognized after 48, after our war of independence, Palestinian Nakba, by the international community. It's a 1949 truce line, the green line. Within it, legitimate Israel. Outside it, I guess the future Palestine, and of course all the West Bank settlements. It's going to be very, very complicated. We are facing not only the right wing that opposes this completely, but also the left wing that is still, especially non-Israelis, who are dreaming of one state. And here I have to quote my father, one state, why not live together between the river and the sea as one big happy family? And my father would answer, because we are not one, not happy, and not a family.
It's he used to say it was a couple like in divorce process,
yes.
right?
Help us to divorce, he said. It has to be a divorce. Now, who knows, maybe in 2 generations, our grandchildren and the Palestinian grandchildren will be so much into whatever generation ZZZ they would be, or listening to this kind of music, or whatever.
Germans and French.
Or AI, yes. And
they used to fight for centuries.
Maybe the world will get tired of the nation state. I would like to see it. It's not happening yet. And they would say, let's do, confederations. The Mediterranean Confederation, the Middle Eastern Confederation, Latin American. And then I would be happy to say, okay, no more two states, but Israel-Palestine part of the local confederacy, and we can live as Jews and Zionists within this wonderful future. But we are not there yet. And that reminds me of a funny story. Can I tell it? Do we have? My father was in Sweden giving a big lecture about 20 years ago. And he talked, of course, about the Oslo process, about the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine. And then a very nice Swedish lady stood up at question time and said, Mr. Oz, why don't you and the Palestinians live happily together? You are so alike. You look alike. You have the same mentality. Your language is almost similar to our ears. Why don't you live happily together in one
both
country?
eat hummus.
Hummus. Why don't you live together? So my father, who was always taking questions very seriously, looked at her and said, Madam, you know, you Swedes and the Norwegians are so alike. You look alike. The mentality is similar. Your languages sound to us completely alike. Why don't you unite into one big Scandinavian happy family? There was silence. The whole auditorium fell silent. And after a few awkward seconds, a Swedish gentleman gets up and says very politely, Dear Mr. Oz, you don't know those Norwegians.
So one last question, actually two, one from the audience and one from myself, but they are, they are sort of similar. From the audience, what would you add to your father's ideas about how to cure a fanatic? Which tools could we use in today's world? And I'd like to talk about humor, because your father wrote he had never met a fanatic with a sense of humor, but sometimes in history it's very, very difficult to laugh or even to smile. And thinking of the past 2 years, right? Can we collectively rescue our sense of humor?
Yes.
And how?
There was Jewish humor in every phase of Jewish history. There was humor in the concentration camps. When we were visiting Lochmei HaGetaot, you know, the kibbutz of the great survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, they would tell us some Holocaust jokes that used to be told in the camps, in the ghettos. And we have our own black humor, and I deeply believe in black humor. I think it's a good thing to have. But in order to have humor, and it's all interconnected, we show it in our book, Jews and Words, you have to be able to treat yourself irreverently, ironically, sometimes self-deprecatingly or laughing at yourself, and to laugh at the rabbi, and to laugh at God himself. And this is very healthy and very Jewish, and I haven't seen much of it in the other monotheistic religions. So yes, one way to cure fanatics, or at least to explain to people they should not support fanatics. You know, a lot of dear people who are not in this room today are supporting Netanyahu because he's the head of Israel, so he's Israel, and they're angry with me for not supporting Netanyahu. They have to understand that even if Netanyahu himself is not fanatic, he has gone over to the fanatics, and this we have to battle against. So a sense of humor is very necessary in order to create the correct distance between us and our goals and our dreams and the universe, to be able to target and criticize and laugh at our most important leaders and values. It's the Jewish way. And maybe I should end with a joke about the Jewish grandmother, because that it catches it. And it's a joke I've been telling, in conversations with the survivors of the 7th of October, when I go to the kibbutzim and give talks, and they laugh, which makes me very happy. So, Jewish grandmother with her little grandson walk on the beach, and suddenly comes a big wave, snatches the little boy, and he disappears under the water. So the Jewish grandmother looks up to the sky and says, "No, no, no. What are you doing to me? I have believed in you all my life. I was a good Orthodox Jew. And this is how you pay me? Shame on you," she says. Before she even finishes talking, another big wave comes and brings the child back into her arms, safe and sound. So she looks up and she says, "Dear God, no, no, no. I thank you very much, all very nice, but where is his hat?" This is Jewish humor. We mustn't lose it.
Thank you so much. It was awesome. תודה רבה, Fania, really.
תודה רבה to you, Leila.